your Edgar Allan Poe. I actually can't see how many hands are up in the air because of the lights, but like look around you, find the other super fans. Let's see who the biggest fan is. The biggest Poe super nerd. So we'll come back to Poe in a little while, but right now let's talk about gluttony. The sin of gluttony has captured the imagination of artists, theologians, philosophers, diet pill manufacturers, chefs, trainers, and generations of people wondering every day, am I eating too much? Am I eating for the right reasons? In this painting on gluttony, Hieronymus Bosch offers a striking vision of what gluttony looks like. Some historians believe that he was inspired to paint this after reading a text called A Book of God's Providence, which described the endless torment awaiting the glutton in the afterlife. I'm just going to adjust this microphone a tiny bit. Thanks. You're the best.
No. We already did lust.
All right, I'll back up. Thank you, Steen. Some historians believe that he was inspired to paint this after reading a text called A Book of God's Providence, which described the endless torment awaiting the glutton in the afterlife. The book describes gluttons in hell drinking urine and eating excrement. Christian sinners, lacking access to the Egyptian Book of the Dead, were unprepared for this. So when you start studying theological texts on gluttony, you quickly realize that it's not about what you eat, but the spirit in which you eat it. St. Thomas Aquinas broke down the sin of gluttony into 5 distinct categories: eating too hastily, too delicately, too expensively, too greedily, and too much. To me, there's only one eating practice that sits squarely at the intersection of all of these things. It is eating ortolan. And? Oh yes. This is an ortolan. For those who can't see, here's a selfie I took with it backstage. My little friend here. Ortolans cannot be found in North America. It's been illegal to hunt them since 1979. And if you're arrested trying to catch one, the fine is 6,000 euros. You might be wondering how I acquired my little buddy. And I'll tell you that it wasn't easy. But first, let me tell you more about this bird and why eating it is so goddamn sinful. The ortolan bunting is a delicate songbird, no bigger than a child's fist. Ortolans fly through the south of France, where the ritual of eating ortolan as we know it today originates. The practice of eating ortolans dates back to the Roman times, but it's mostly a French delicacy. Notice how the woman in this painting is wearing a napkin on her head? This is a very important part of consuming meal, and I'll explain why in a minute. But first, here's the traditional way to prepare an ortolan, and vegans maybe, prepare yourselves. First, the songbirds are captured either in nets or in glue smeared on the branches of their favored trees. After they're caught, they're made as fat as possible before their death. You see, ortolans are night feeders. To give them a sense that it's always nighttime, their captors gouge out their eyes or keep them in darkness, causing them to gorge themselves on nuts and grains and berries every hour of every day. This goes on for weeks. Once the ortolans become so bloated that they can hardly stand and barely breathe, they are drowned in Armagnac. Their tiny lungs fill with brandy, flavoring them from the inside. The ortolan is then plucked, roasted whole, and brought to the table, where it is consumed. The head, the beak, the bones, and all. Gourmands describe ortolan as a holy grail of flavor, and talk about it being a mixture of heaven and hell. In fact, religious themes often come up around the ritual of ortolan eating. Before taking that first bite, it is customary to put a napkin over your head. This is done for several reasons: to savor the aromas, to hide your mouth as you chew, and it is said, to hide your face from God. This is a real photo of a secret society called the Brotherhood of the Ortolans from the Landes region in France. They get together and have secret meetings where they eat these birds. So when you eat an ortolan, you're doing something so disgraceful, so cruel, so decadent, and so shameful that you can't let God see you do it. Because really, the entire ritual of eating an ortolan, from the moment its feathers are tarnished by the glue in those traps, to the last shameful bite, this ritual is about taking something beautiful and destroying it. If you want to know what eating an ortolan is really like, there's this one Anthony Bourdain quote. Yeah, that's right. You'll notice that this slide is black because I want you to close your eyes and really picture it. Oh, wait, spoiler. So here's Anthony Bourdain in his memoir, Medium Raw. I apologize that I keep messing this up. Reading about his experience. So what he says is, in the darkness under my shroud, I realize that in my eagerness to fully enjoy the experience, I've closed my eyes. First comes the skin and the fat. It's hot. So hot that I'm drawing short, panicky, circular breaths in and out, like a high-speed trumpet player, breathing around the ortolan, shifting it gingerly around my mouth with my tongue so that I don't burn myself. I listen for the sounds of jaws against bone around me, but hear only others breathing, the muffled hiss of rapidly moving air through teeth under a dozen linen napkins. There is a vestigial flavor of Armagnac, low-hanging fumes of airborne fat particles, an intoxicating, delicious miasma. Time goes by. Seconds? Moments? I don't know. I hear the first snap of tiny bones from somewhere near and decide to brave it. I bring my molars down through the bird's rib cage with a wet crunch, and I'm rewarded with a scalding hot rush of burning fat and guts down my throat. Rarely have pain and delight combined so well. I'm giddily uncomfortable, breathing in short, controlled gasps as I slowly, ever so slowly, begin to chew. With every bite, as the thin bones and layers of fat, meat, skin, and organs compact in on themselves, there are sublime dribbles of varied and wondrous ancient flavors. Figs, Armagnac, dark flesh slightly infused with the salty taste of my own blood, as my mouth is prickled by the sharp bones. As I swallow, I draw in the head and beak, which until now have been hanging from my lips, and blithely crush the skull. It's all lighthearted from here. Maybe. Today, the practice of eating ortolans is finally beginning to vanish. Though technically illegal since 1979, law enforcement officials in certain regions of southwest France historically turned a blind eye to the practice of eating these birds. This changed last year when the remaining Brotherhood of Ortolan hunters, all now between the ages of 60 and 80, were convicted and fined. Finally. Here you see activists dismantling ortolan traps in the region. Eating ortolans never caught on here in the United States, but I want to discuss one bizarre incident in which French chef Jean-Louis Paladin, owner of 2 Michelin stars and seen here posing with a Vitamix in front of his junk, boasted about allegedly smuggling 400 ortolans, as quoted to the New York Times, in his daughter's diapers. This is the only quote I could find on the entire internet about this matter, and you're welcome for that strange mental image. I can't, not yet. The notion of God, ortolans, and the devil comes up in unexpected places. While Proust and Colette famously described ortolan eating in their books, there's only one American writer morbid and knowledgeable enough to feature ortolans in his prose, and it was, you guessed it, Edgar Allan Poe. So this is where I'm going to test your knowledge. Poe brings it up in one of the first short stories he ever wrote. Here's something you may not know about Poe. Before he became the master of Gothic horror that we know him as today, he tried his hand at writing humor and satire. This early short story was called Le Duc d'Omelette. It was written when he was 23 years old. It's a short story about a man called the Duke of Omelets, also known as the Prince of Foie Gras. It's a very short story, mostly in English, some of it is in French, and it goes something like this. This is my short synopsis. The Duc de l'Omelette dies while dining on Ortolans and finds himself in hell. Poe describes hell as an apartment filled with various works of art with a window overlooking a fiery hellscape. Face to face with Satan, the Duke manages to avoid damnation by cheating him at a game of cards. Poe submitted this piece to a short story contest being run by the Philadelphia Saturday Courier. The prize was $50. Poe did not win. So, how many of you know that story? Again, raise your hands, Poe superfans, look around the room, see if you out-Poed the other Poe nerds, but, see me after class if you know the story. I'm curious about your impressions. Okay, now I'm gonna attempt to eat this in front of you. It's a little scary, but I can't.
You're sent from God.
I can't. I'm really gonna try, but maybe a napkin would help. We'll see. So guys, this got me thinking. We have this example of an Ortolan killing a man in literature, but has this ever happened in real life? Has an Ortolan ever gotten revenge on the man eating it? Turns out that there's one documented case. It happened in 1776, and what follows is a very short tale of the life and times of one man killed by Ortolan. If I ever had to parody myself doing an Odd Salon talk, it would go something like this. The misadventures of Edward Wortley Montagu. He traveled a lot by ship. Edward Montagu was a traveler, adventurer, scholar, polygamist, and criminal. He was the first British person inoculated against smallpox. All of this is true, by the way. As a child, he, quote, ran away often, took up with unsuitable women, whatever that means, drank copiously, and was disinherited by his family. Despite being disowned, he tricked his way into an inheritance and began to travel the world. Montagu spent his life running up debts and mistresses, and eventually ended up in debtor's prison. A place where many of us would also be if it still existed. I'm glad it doesn't. He had one period of clarity, during which he wrote a book called Reflections on the Rise and Fall of the Ancient Republics. That's like his one redeeming trait. Closer to the end of his life, he started affecting Turkish costume, claiming to be the illegitimate son of the Turkish Sultan, which the Sultan, by the way, encouraged, and converted to Islam, making plans to travel to Mecca. Unfortunately, he did not get to go to Mecca because a year later, he died while eating an ortolan. What happened was an ortolan bone lacerated his throat, creating an abscess. Doctors tried to save him, but he died a few short weeks later. The end of that mini talk. So, you've all been wondering, I'm sure, how did I get my hands on this ortolan? Well, like when I research a talk, I just really get into it, like really. So I started doing some Googling, and I ended up on some very unsavory subreddits, and this led to a trip down the dark web where it was intimated to me that some guy on the internet knew some guy who knew some guy who might be able to, on the full moon, put me in touch with a chef in France who could make this happen. But I quickly realized that if I went through on that plan, the title of this talk would have been, I paid a guy $500 to catch a bird, but then I let it go because I felt too guilty. An Odd Salon talk, screencast from a French jail by Naughty Alert. And I'm sure that also would have been an interesting talk, but like maybe I'll do my third talk, screencast from jail. You gotta have aspirations. I'm working my way up to it, guys. So I did the next best thing. This is Janice Boone, food stylist on the television show Hannibal. In her blog, Feeding Hannibal, Poon describes her process of making ethical Ortolan birds out of marzipan, just like this one here. The eyes are made out of pine nuts. Sorry, I'm talking with my mouth full. It's really good. The body is pure sugar and almond paste. The feet are made out of rice spaghetti so that it would be gluten-free. You may now open your boxes. The Ortolans contained within are vegan, artisanal, gluten-free, cruelty-free. They are not diabetic friendly. They are full of sugar. And if you share, there should be enough for everyone. So everybody, enjoy your meal, share with others, but remember not to eat too hastily, too delicately, too expensively, too greedily, or too much. I would like to thank Paul Komoda and Star St. Germain for helping me craft these little guys in time for the talk. And thank you everyone.
Nadia Love, everybody!